Okay, I have a lot of questions that I took from your books that I'd like to go through. It's an ambitious list. There's like 50 questions, so the only way to realistically do it would be basically 3-minute answers. So I'm going to try to cover a lot so you don't have to get everything in every answer because it's probably in here. You don't each have to answer it, only if you feel comfortable. Anyone can answer it. But I would like to try to do 3-minute answers so I could cover a tremendous amount of topics that I think are all worth mentioning, even though I realize each one in itself could be a full panel. We'll try to go through them quick. So the first question is, and these questions are meant for the public, so I know you've answered these before, but let's get everyone clear on your thoughts on it. So the first question is, are biotech companies creating GMO seeds so they can better feed the developing world?
Apparently, perhaps, everybody kind of grimaced at that question. I think that's been an argument that's been presented. And there is, first of all, there's very little evidence that GMOs are being used to feed Americans, just starting there, since actually most GMOs are used to produce food for automobiles, basically in the United States, which I think it's like 40 to 50% at least, or for ethanol. Yeah. So most of those GMOs go into your gas tank. And it's funny, in the developing world, it's now a big, big question, is the effort of big seed companies to try to bring their patented seeds into places that have significant agriculture. And I was just in South Africa where this is a big issue now. And so the argument is that we're going to help feed people with GMOs. And the evidence does not necessarily seem to indicate that that's the case, because the way that that would happen is, number one, that GMOs would offer higher yields than whatever existing agriculture system is in place. And there's actually very little evidence to suggest that actually GMOs are actually increasing the yields that are already producing in countries like that. They are actually often having the effect of compelling farmers to buy the inputs that are very important to go along with GMOs, including herbicides like Roundup when it comes to soybeans. So that's a quick answer to a much more complex question.
I didn't know we were going to start with comedy, Steve. You should have warned me. I thought it was going to be a serious question. So Monsanto, Dow, DuPont, BASF, Syngenta, and ChemChina, they're all chemical companies. They don't make their money on feeding anybody. They make their money on selling chemicals. And they have utilized this technology to create plants and crops that require hundreds of millions and more pounds of their chemicals, which feeds their bottom line. That's what they do. We may like that or not like that, but the idea that it has anything to do with feeding the world, that Monsanto is devoted to, or in any fashion, or DuPont or Dow feeding the world is that's just trying to whitewash their technology. And as Mark was saying, I also want to just really point out that over 55% of our cropland in the United States is in corn and soy, genetically engineered corn and soy. 40% of that, 45% goes into cars. Another 40% goes to feed the animals in these horrible animal factories, including dairies. These animals, including dairy cows, should not be eating corn, but they feed it to them anyway because that's how they feed their bottom line. A huge percentage of it goes into high fructose corn syrup, and there's a little bit of sweet corn over there, right? Same thing with soy. Chicken factories, gasoline, just like, and soy lecithin. Very little of that soy is actually fed to anybody. So the vast majority of our cropland now, I think 58% last time I looked, is actually in these commodity crops. So it does not increase yield. As a matter of fact, there's a 5% yield drag on genetically engineered soy, 5% less. But it wouldn't make any difference even if it did increase yield, because it's not increasing the yield for anything that we directly eat. If we were to judge our agriculture not by yield per acre, but by nutrition per acre, our agriculture would place far down in the world's agriculture. What they are trying to do around the world with Gates, who is a big supporter of Monsanto. Monsanto and Gates are very close. Gates actually invested over $27 million in Monsanto during the 2008 crash. They're trying to get the rest of the world to go to commodity agriculture, not food agriculture, because you make more money by selling your agriculture for commodities like corn, soy, and cotton, for gasoline, and for animal factories, and for processed foods than you by selling food. That would be a disaster, massively increase hunger if they were to follow our pattern and have this majority of their land in commodity versus food. Remember that distinction, almost nobody makes it. Commodity agriculture versus food agriculture. Food, nutrition should be what we're about, not Monsanto's bottom line and GMO commodity crops.
Yeah, this is a complicated thing. There's so many things to add. The big chemical companies like the ones you mentioned that are coming to my mind, Syngenta and Bayer, for example, companies based in Switzerland and Germany, creating agricultural chemicals that are not only banned in their own country, but they're banned across the entire continent of Europe, but they are happily selling to the United States where we happily use them. That's one thing to think about. The public health imperative in Europe is considerably stronger than it is here. They don't even allow them to use the chemicals that their own companies are making, which is, there's some very dark irony about that. So that's a part of it, that there is a certain level at which GMOs are simply a delivery system for the chemicals that predated the GMOs. GMOs just scales it up. In terms of whether they're using these seeds to feed the world, they're using them to feed, as we've heard, the numbers are 40% for ethanol, 40% for cheap hamburgers and cheap chicken nuggets. So they're putting calories in people's bodies. They just don't, they happen to be very calorie heavy and very low nutritional density. So they're making us fat, and they're creating all kinds of public health problems. They're putting calories in a lot of people's bodies, but not the kind of calories that we want. And the other thing is to remember the environmental rings that grow out of this. So when you see these companies having saturated their markets in North America, now they are pushing to create monoculture crops in places like Paraguay and Argentina and Brazil. And how are they doing that? They are mowing down rainforests to create more monoculture crops, to feed more monoculture livestock, and then they've got to try to convince these countries to eat the way Americans do. Now, there are a lot of problems with this. One are the public health issues, obviously. Like, we don't need more people in the world to eat the way Americans do, because Americans eat very poorly. The other thing is that a lot of countries have decided that eating a lot of meat is the way they can convince themselves that they've arrived in the modern era, because Americans eat a lot of meat, so now China wants to eat a lot of meat. This is a very bad idea. There's no way that the world can eat in the way that we do, either in terms of its public health or in terms of its land use. So unfortunately, the country that has created the most unsustainable food structures is also the one that is being pitched around the world, and other countries are trying to model their own systems after ours, which is really a bad idea. So there are a lot of problems associated with this one simple question.